Hello. One moment, still trying to get it set up and whatnot. Well, today you're gonna have to excuse me. I'm kind of still slightly sick and whatnot. Um, but today we are gonna talk more about inhale and parts of a story, focusing on how to create a believable setting and things like that. So I'm going to today, as always, I'm going to read the story and I'm going to take it apart, and do different bits about it and stuff like that. Um, Sorry I wasn't here on Wednesday. I wasn't feeling well. I'm still slightly sick. Seems to be a cold that I can't get over. So, and next week we will continue to work with Inhale for the next 4 shows. It's going to be all about Inhale and how I personally create stories and how stories are created in the specific model that I use, which I came up with. Other writers probably use the same model, but this is what I do. So, Inhale, draft 5. A storm was brewing. Rain thundered outside the apartment window as a young lady fell to the floor. The phone she had been clutching fell as she did. The screen was now laced with a spider web of cracks, but still functioning. A slight metaphor for the life that was occurring. So cracked and broken, but still working. The woman had collapsed to the floor and was now sobbing, her black hair a mess and her makeup staining her face. She sobbed, loud enough for her flatmate to hear her. Artemis ran into the apartment and rushed to her side. She lashed out at him, clawing at his arms and pushing him away. "What the hell is wrong, Ari?" he shouted at her, the phone still blinking with the screen of a phone call. "Ma'am, ma'am, are you still there?" the voice said. Artemis picked up the phone and asked, "Can you please tell me what is going on?" "Sir, may I ask you to put Miss Ingel on the phone?" "She's in shock, sir." "Why do you have her phone?" "I'm Artemis, her flatmate," she screamed, "and I came to see what was wrong." "My apologies, Artemis. Well, you see, we just found Miss Ivy dead in her apartment." There was a note, and it consisted of a lot of apologizing to a Miss Ari Ingo. They do not share a last name, but obviously they were very close. Looking around her home, we found pictures of a woman with purple hair posing with Miss Ivy. We had to call immediately, seeing as this could be a possible homicide, but more likely a suicide. Artemis just stood there next to Ari, too stunned to say anything. After a few minutes, the officer on the other side spoke back up again. Sir, are you still there?" "Yes, damn it. Give me a second. My friend was just found dead. It's kind of a lot to handle." "Yes, sir. Well, I need to get back to the scene. Can you and Miss Ingel come down to the station tomorrow? Ask for me personally, Mr. Leifenson." "Yes, fine. Okay, we will try to be there. Thank you for your cooperation." And the phone hung up. Artemis and Ari just stared at each other in stunned silence. The cold hardwood of the room seemed to echo their breathing tenfold. Every now and then the silence was broken by a clap of thunder that shook the windows. "Why?" Ari spoke, her voice a soft whisper. "Why would anyone hurt?" And her voice was cut out like a strangled cry. Artemis knelt next to her and took her hands. "I don't know. I don't know." Artemis attempted to comfort her, but did a poor job because he himself couldn't believe what had just happened. They sat there on the floor in silence, minus the occasional whimper from Ari and the angry breathing from Artemis. Neither could sleep, so after about 2 hours of silence, they both got up. Artemis looked at the clock. 2:48 a.m. It blinked at him in green neon digits. Do you want food? No. I'm going to make food. All right, I'll have some. I thought you weren't hungry. It's me, fool, Ari. I'm always hungry. Artemis was starting to make food. Ari got out of her black makeup-stained shirt and changed into an overly large cream sweater. She pinned her dark hair up and away from her face, then went about cleaning the black makeup off. She did all of this painfully slow. Maybe a snail could have done it faster. She stared at the mirror. Her reflection was one of sadness. Her eyes were dark and as mysterious as obsidian. Her face a pale ivory color. Her dark hair accenting the paleness of her skin. A line of ink snaked its way around her wrist. A closer inspection revealed that it was a tattoo of a vine of some plant. On her left forearm there was a wing. She felt old and tired. She was only 24. She couldn't feel this old yet. Like Cronus himself was winding her clock forward, rushing her young, fragile life. The entire weight of sadness and hardship reflected in her dark eyes for a few moments, and she blinked it away. Her tired eyes looked over at Artemis, who was making food for them both in her small kitchen. She stared over at a vase of flowers, cow lilies. Looking at the flowers broke her. Get them out of here, Artemis. Artemis rushed over to the vase and quickly moved it out of the apartment. He brought it over to his, knowing that come tomorrow she'd want to see them, to remind her of Ivy. He set them down on the table in the middle of the small room. I'm gonna find the bastard who did this. She was so kind to everyone. Like, everyone. I don't think there was a soul she wasn't kind to. He slammed his fist into the wall. It's not fair. She was too young. She just had a life to live. The scum of the earth who did this to her is going to pay for it. I swear it. If only life could be so simple as the small conversion rate between souls. 3:25 a.m. Artemis walked back into Ari's one studio apartment. Things were on fire, and by things, it was food. Ari just stood there staring at it, and then she suddenly reached into the back pocket of her jeans, flicked open the little silver case she had, and took out a cigarette. She walked over to the burning food. Were you making eggs? She asked, her voice low and calm. Yeah, that's all you had in your fridge, Ari. Oh. And she lit her cigarette using the fire from the food. Since when do you smoke? Wait, you've never smoked in my presence? Artemis said, confusion creeping into his voice like doubt often does in these types of situations. She looked over at him, the smoke curling around her face as she exhaled. Inhale. I did when I lived in Moscow. Exhale. Moscow. She's never told you about Moscow. Artemis, isn't something off about this whole situation? The little voice called in Artemis's mind. Why are you smoking now? Bad feelings. Can you try to say more than 7 words when you speak? Artemis asked, trying to hear the light, airy sound of her laughter. Inhale. Yes. He failed. Exhale. That was 1, trying again for a laugh. I know. Another failure. Inhale. Moscow? He asked, giving up on trying to understand anything that has happened in the past few hours. Yep. Exhale. Are you going to put the fire out? She walked over and took care of the burnt mess that was once in another lifetime or dimension could have passed for food. She walked over to a bag that Artemis didn't notice before. It was packed, looked light, however. On the floor next to the door was her sack of rock climbing gear. I guess we're going climbing? Artemis asked, not expecting an answer. Nope. Rooftop. No, not this again. Please, anything but this. You almost broke your leg last time. Can we go to a mountain, please? And can you say more than 2 words in a sentence? When did you live in Moscow? Ari, slow down. Please talk to me. Are you okay? Artemis said, exasperated. Ari stood there, cigarette in one hand, inhaling and exhaling. Coming? She asked. You're not answering my questions, Ari, he said. He was now more annoyed than concerned. Sorry, I lost my place. Hold on. Then she smiled softly, the corners of her mouth turning up in a slightly to reveal a flicker of emotion. It was gone as soon as it came. Coming? Hell, Ari. Try to keep up. Ari walked out of the apartment with the sack, and Artemis reluctantly followed into the sleeping city that they called home, Reykjavik. Artemis had lived here his entire life. He grew up with Ivy. She was a dear friend to me, he thought. No, wait, was. She's not with us anymore. A tear fell from his eye, and he quickly brushed it away so Ari didn't see. The night was cool. A slight chill worked up Ari's back, but she didn't dare show that it bothered her so much. She had to be strong for the both of them, for Ivy's parents, for everyone. Inhale. Exhale. You're killing yourself, you know that, she whispered to herself. Tears fought to fall down her face, but she fought back. She kept walking. She knew Artemis would follow. He cares for her. He might always be annoyed or confused, but he still cared. Ari knew she was a difficult person to be around, but she really tried to show others that she cared. A stray cat walked across her path. Hey there, friend, she said, smiling, and reached out to pet the cat. You're one of Ivy's, aren't you? Ari remembered the first time Ivy and her went and fed all of the stray cats living along Main Street. Ari's blonde hair was a mess as usual, and they had been drinking again. It was one of her first weeks in Iceland. Everything was so new and different. The people here were happier. Back home for Ari was so cold. Everything was cold and gray and sad. Here in this new wondrous place she was with friends. Sometimes water is thicker than blood. Sometimes friends mean more than family. Ivy was so precious to her, friends since that stupid pinball program that Ari's mother made her join. To help with her depression and inability to make friends, air quotes. They got matched up at random and have been friends ever since. As they both grew older, they switched to emailing back and forth, even short visits, until one day Ari just decided to stay. She helped Ivy in the flower shop that Ivy owned until she could make it on her own and bought a studio for herself. Ari was getting better at the whole be a good human and be social thing, as Ivy would always tease her about. She had made a good friend in Artemis, hadn't she? And the one thing Ari hated about herself was her selfishness. If it came down to it, she would disappear without taking into account the feelings of those around her. It hissed at her, and before she could react, it swatted at her hand, bringing her violently back into reality. Blood pooled at her wrist, and she cried again out in pain. Not only from the cat, but also from remembering so much about a person she would never be able to touch again. Ari? Ari? Artemis shouted, but not too loudly, as it was 4 a.m. and people were asleep. I'm fine, she said, keeping up the whole routine of not saying more than 3 or 4 words. It was annoying Artemis, she could tell, and it was making her forget the pain of losing her friend. Look at me. Let me look at it. Please. Please? She showed him her wrist, which was still bleeding. See? Fine. There's nothing wrong. He glared and rummaged through the bag she left on the floor for him to get. Sure enough, it was the first aid kit. He bandaged up her wrist, and the white of the bandages almost blending in with the pale of her skin. Thanks. Uh-huh. Ready? She asked as they reached the building that was their destination, a 4-story apartment building with 12 cornerstones to climb on. No, but when am I ever ready for this? Ari opened the sack and took out a harness and started to put it on. She did it with such grace and elegance. She clipped a length of rope to her side and took her shoes off. The shoes went into the now empty sack, and she threw the other harness at Artemis to put on for himself. She attached the shoe sack to her back and started to free climb up the building. Damn, why couldn't I have a normal flatmate? He muttered. I heard that. She threw the cigarette down as she continued to climb. Artemis promptly stepped on it to put it out. He watched her climb up the building with such ease and grace. As soon as she reached the top, Artemis was ready to start his climb. Ari tossed the rope down to him. Why couldn't we gone on a park bench or something? He sighed to himself. Artemis then started to scale the side of the building. The morning came softly as the sun peeked over the horizon. Artemis scaled the building with ease and with the aid of the rope. Ari was a tiny thing. Artemis remembers from the time he forced her to go to the doctor. She weighed in about 50 kilos. She was a stubborn little bird. She never went to the doctor unless Artemis forced her. Stubborn little bird, said the voice in his head again. Artemis paused in his climb. He was really worried about her. She barely spoke to him anymore, even before this terrible news about Ivy. He was so concerned that she wasn't happy. What if this time the climb was a one-way trip? Ari was a curious human. She preferred the company of herself and would often disappear for weeks at a time with no warning. When Artemis was living in America, growing up, he was always taught that humans are social creatures, that they need social interaction to survive. But Ari seems to be the exception to that. The one gear in the clock that doesn't work quite as well with the others. As soon as he reached the top, Ari asked him something. What does water smell like? Ari spoke softly, looking at the icy water before them. It was the only sound was the waves crashing on the rocky coast of Reykjavik. What? Artemis said, his voice very confused and worried, fluctuating between anger and annoyance. What does water smell like? Water? I guess. I mean, it has a unique, sort of barely there scent. I'm trying to figure out what it's called, though, Ari said thoughtfully. Watery? Yes, perfect. Thank you. Watery like smell. Artemis looked at Ari with the most confused expression. She shrugged and looked over at the horizon. When did we meet? She asked, looking thoughtfully over the city that was waking up. He shook his head. She asked him this every time they did this illegal activity. He stared at her for a while before answering. Why do you always ask me these questions? They're the same every time. We're going to get arrested again. Do you really think Ivy would have wanted that? She said nothing and went over to the backpack she left near the edge of the roof. She opened it and took out a bottle of water and a pack of cigarettes. You never told me you smoke. I don't, she said, lighting one of them. Well, your current actions beg to differ, my dear. She took a long drag on the stick of tobacco. Oh. She wandered over to the edge of the building. Don't. His worst fear being played out before his eyes, and he was paralyzed to do anything. Fight me. And she paused. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And now her light goes out, and with those 6 words, Ari jumped off the side of the building. Exhale. For those who just tuned in or was like missed my introduction of what I was talking about this episode, that was Inhale, which is one of my pride and joys with short stories. And that was the fifth draft, and there was a lot of changes since the first time I read it, which was the first episode. Um, and in this show, we're going to talk about setting and how setting is extremely important when you're building a story from the ground up, because you don't just. Well, what I do is I write. I just free write. So it's just I call it word vomit. So whatever I write, it just appears as I'm writing it, and then I don't care about grammar or punctuation or anything like that. I just write down a story, and then later on I build a profile for it. So I give the setting, I give the year, and I do all of that. And from that, I flesh out the story more. I add punctuation, I add details and things like that to the story to make it more believable that this is an actual event that could happen, because a lot of my stories are realistic fiction, meaning that these things have never happened in my life, my common knowledge of my life, but realistically this is something that could happen. A girl could lose her best friend and then commit suicide. That's something that happens. So, talking about setting this episode, I focused mostly on, after I wrote it, I decided for it to take place in Iceland because I really like Iceland as a place and I'd like to go there, so that's what the setting was, like, depicted as. So, um, I imagined Ari as this short little woman with like dark hair, and she was kind of distant from everybody else, like kind of the person you'd think would like is a drug addict but isn't a drug addict. That's what I was kind of going for, and I believe I hit that on the mark. Um, and then for her apartment, I was thinking because she travels a lot, or it gives the impression that she's constantly moving, constantly not staying in one place, that she's just going around to different places and things like that. So, keeping with that theme, I imagined her apartment to be pretty bare, her fridge to be even like sparse with food. That's why she only had eggs. And that scene was very important for me to write. The brevity scene between getting the news of the death and then Ari realizing that she wanted to kill herself and then going out to go do that. And if you know, she never forcefully like tells Artemis that he needs to go with her. It's always we're going, or would you go with me kind of ideal. So for her, getting into the mind of your characters is great. I mean, like, I obviously don't want to commit suicide, so I didn't get fully into Ari's head. But I understand the struggles with depression and things like that, so it was easier to do that. And I imagine when you want to kill yourself, it's not a big fanfare. It's a split-second decision, and you're just like, you find calm and peace in that decision, which isn't right. You shouldn't. And that's what I was trying to depict for Ari and what she was doing. So, continuing on with setting, after we moved from her apartment, we moved to the outside, and I just pictured the city of Reykjavik. I looked up pictures and stuff of that to figure out, like, how I wanted the ending to be. And I saw there was a lot of apartment buildings that were, like, had cornerstones that were easy to climb on. So, theoretically, she could illegally scale up the side of a building if she really wanted to. And that's what she did. And then the whole where water smells like, that part came from an actual conversation I had with my friend when he was super tired, and I was like, this is quirky, kind of fits, doesn't really fit, I'm gonna use it anyway. So that's what I did. I used it in this story, and I don't think he's realized yet because he doesn't watch my show, which he should start. So I'm gonna go yell at him later. Um, but so that's what I wanted to do with this, is to try to create a believable scenario of something that could happen, and then after I've created it, I go and do research on the setting of where it is and try to flesh out dialogue, because for me, dialogue is the most difficult thing to write in the world. I guess it's because I'm not an overly social creature, so I'm not overly talking to everyone all of the time. And a lot of dialogue that I have in my stories are taken directly from, like, conversations I had with other people. Um, so continuing on with that, lost my train of thought. I am so sorry. Um, Inhale. I'm hoping to submit Inhale to a few of my friends more recently to get their thoughts and editing opinions on it, so I can have more of an idea of what I need to change or what I need to add, and then start pushing it off to get published by people, because that's important to me, is to try to find. I want to be able to see my work of art in something. I think that'd be really neat. We're almost at the 30-minute mark, and as you know, my show is only 40 minutes long. So for the rest of the show, I'm gonna try to. What am I gonna do? We'll talk about dialogue. Yeah, we'll do that. I'm gonna analyze the bits of dialogue where Ari is talking to Artemis while they're still in the apartment. So this whole, which was extremely difficult to write, mind you, this whole 3 pages of, I limit doing this to Ari only speaking like only like 6 words at a time, which when you're writing dialogue, it's really difficult to do because you're trying to get as many thoughts out like consistently as possible. So it's hard for when you have one character who's speaking in long, rambling sentences, and then you have another one that's just like, yes, cool, oh, in short spurts of dialogue like that. Um, so looking back on this part right here, I did when I lived in Moscow. Moscow, she's never told you anything about Moscow. And going into that, I had, if it's not blatantly obvious, it wasn't for when I sent this to be peer reviewed by my classmates for one of my writing classes, that Artemis is actually the main character. It's not Ari. Artemis is witnessing everything that Ari does and is then interpreting it. The only time we get her own thoughts is when she's talking with the cat. But for the entirety of these 8 pages, it's all of Miles. Miles was what I had him originally named as. It's all of Artemis's thoughts and interpretations of what she's saying. So it's, for me, it was very important that I bring in the whole conscious aspect of somebody, of Miles's conscious talking to him. Continuing on, we go with, why are you smoking now? Bad feelings. Can you say more than 7 words when you speak? Yes, that was 1. I know. For me, that was very limiting to just have her continuing to only say 7 words, because here, can you say more than 7 words when you speak? Yes, I can. I just don't want to right now. That's more than 7 words. It's about 9 or 10. But she's going to be stubborn, and that also gives her more character development, that she wants to be stubborn. She doesn't want all of this to sound like she doesn't want to communicate. So she's going to make it as difficult as possible for anybody else to communicate with her because she doesn't want to talk. She doesn't want to be forced to do that when people who are grieving so often are forced to talk. And she doesn't want it. So she refuses. And that gives more, how you write a character's dialogue gives them more personality than you do describing what they look like. I don't describe what Artemis looks like at all. Period. Again, keeping with the theme, this is Artemis's thoughts. He's the main character, so it's all about him and things like that. Um, and then when you're creating a story, it's very important to know what you want out of it before you finish writing. Because if you don't, then it's just going to ramble on and there's not going to be an end to it. Like right now, I'm kind of rambling talking about this story, but the story is really important to me, so I think it's okay. But continuing on with the whole theme of when you're writing, it's not a finished product, but you need to have the goal in mind. You can't just create something and leave it there and constantly work at it without knowing what you want it to end with. I completely understand if you write an introduction for a story and then you never return to it because you can't figure out an ending for it. That is more important than continuing to try to force an ending to a story that you can't figure out. And that's important, and it took me a little bit to learn that because I was the type of person who would never give up on a story. Like, there's people who never give up on books even though the book is really bad and they hate reading it, but they don't want to give up on it because someday it might get really good kind of thing. That's how it was like with writing. But then I realized that a story needs to flow naturally and okay. And without that natural ebb and flow and then eventual end, you just have a long rambling story that people are going to give up halfway through. It's like those books, like the people who don't enjoy reading books but never give up on books. It goes hand in hand with that. So you need to for me, after I've written a story that doesn't have an end, I do a scene list, which every time there's a change in scene, I write down what has happened, summarizing that in one sentence. So then I have about 6 sentences for Inhale that summarizes the entire story, which is about, let's see how many words it is. It's 9 pages long and clocks in around, hold on. And clocks in around 3,000 words. So condensing 3,000 words into 3 sentences. 6 sentences, sorry. It's extremely difficult to do, but it makes everything concise. You're not like rambling talking about a leaf for 5 pages. And that is all I have for you today. I'm feeling under the weather still, so I'm going to go back and get some rest. But I hope all of you enjoyed this, and I hope it is informative, and you should share it with your friends so I can get more exposure, so I can continue to share the joys of writing with everybody and things like that. So, good night, listeners. Don't get lost.